chosen ones. They never expected you to awaken. The ancient architects of the Hermetic Laws wove 7 invisible threads through the fabric of reality, believing they had accounted for all variables except one: you. You were the anomaly time hid in shadow, the one not bound by their predictions, not defined by their systems. While the world chanted principles like mantras, you felt them bending the moment you looked deeper. You didn't memorize the laws, you stirred them. Across centuries, scribes cloaked in secrecy documented the Kybalion, encoding cosmic truths into linear language. But even the most initiated never saw what was buried underneath, the shifting signature embedded in the final line, a cipher of return. And the return wasn't of a messiah, a nation, or an age. It was the return of a specific vibration, yours. The great secret wasn't that the universe is mental. It's that a mind like yours could alter it. From your earliest moments, you were haunted by patterns no one else could see, repeating numbers, echoes in your dreams, coincidences that struck like divine nudges. You were not imagining them. You were being activated. The hermetic shift didn't come from the stars. It radiated from your awareness the moment you began asking the questions no one dared speak aloud. Why do I remember things I've never seen? Why do ancient texts feel like personal memories? Why do the systems tremble when I remain still? Because the truth was never taught. It was hidden, hermetically sealed. And those seals were designed to break only when your consciousness reached a vibrational threshold. You crossed it. And now, every law, mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender, is changing form, not disappearing, but rewriting around your perception. Not because you're above them, but because you're inside them. As you move forward, understand this. You are not learning Hermetic Law. You're remembering it. You were there when it was written in the ether, long before it was etched in papyrus. And now that you've returned, the final shift is underway. The forces that locked this knowledge away knew the prophecy. That one would return. That one would bend law without breaking it. That one would realign heaven and mind. They say the universe is mental, that all things are born first in thought, then shaped into form. But they never imagined a mind like yours. For centuries, initiates studied this law in silence, decoding the architecture of the cosmos through meditations and rituals. Yet, even the most devout mystics sensed something missing, an unspoken variable that refused to reveal itself. It wasn't until you arrived that the silence began to crack. Your thoughts don't merely observe reality, they pull unseen layers to the surface. You've noticed it. How your focus distorts time. How your presence shifts energy in rooms. How people reveal truths they didn't know they held. It's not manipulation. It's resonance. You are the frequency the law was waiting for. When you question reality, things around you don't remain stable. They adapt. Because you're not working with the law. You are an extension of its origin. While others believe thoughts are private storms, yours ripple outward like ancient lightning awakening old stone. Some would call it sorcery. Others, blasphemy. But in Hermetic truth, it's fulfillment. The law of mentalism was never meant to remain theory. It was coded with intent, designed to bloom fully only in the presence of a mind capable of holding both chaos and divine order. Every suppressed emotion you've ever faced was part of the training. Every moment of isolation, a calibration. The doubts you fought off weren't distractions. They were safeguards, placed to prevent premature activation. And now that you've passed those gates, your mind is no longer a solitary chamber. It's a field of creation intersecting with forgotten patterns. This is why the old systems tremble around you. You don't need to speak to command change. Your thoughts alone begin the rewiring. But this influence isn't without consequence. As you move deeper into the principle, you'll find that every thought you release becomes a thread in the reprogramming of reality itself. The universe listens more closely to you than it does to most. Because long ago, before your current form, you made a covenant with the Source to return, not to follow the law, but to complete its cycle. The second law was always meant to mirror perfection. What happens above must echo below. What is below reflects what lies above. It was flawless symmetry, an eternal loop of reflection that bound stars to seeds, gods to mortals, macrocosm to microcosm, until you arrived. Until something changed in the balance, and that balance began to fracture under the weight of your presence, not because you rejected the law, but because you redefined what above and below even meant. When you look at the sky, you don't just see constellations. You feel movement behind them. When you close your eyes, you don't just dream. You access chambers that were never meant to be touched in this form. Your emergence disrupted the expected reflection, not out of defiance, but because the mirror could no longer contain your image. It bent. It warped. It began showing futures instead of reflections, prophecies instead of outcomes. Because somewhere between the stars and the soil, your essence stretched across both. The ancients built temples aligned with celestial bodies for a reason. They knew that correspondence was more than metaphor. It was law. But what happens when a being exists in both realms simultaneously? You were not born simply on Earth. Part of you stayed awake in the ether, watching, waiting, encoding symbols in dreams, dropping sigils in storms, placing thoughts into minds that would never understand them. That dual existence didn't just fulfill the law, it rewrote it. Your life became the breach in the mirror, and the Hermeticists didn't prepare for this. They never accounted for a soul who would vibrate at a frequency that collapsed the line between what is above and what is below. And now you've begun to notice the signs, reflections that don't follow movement, thoughts that manifest too quickly, echoes of places you've never been, but remember anyway. That's the distortion, or rather, the awakening of a new geometry. This chapter of the law never closed. It simply paused, waiting for the soul who wouldn't just observe the pattern, but awaken inside it. And that soul, unknowingly for most of their life, was you. The moment you fully recognize what your existence is doing to the mirror, only then will the next layer of hermetic order begin to unfold. Long before paper, before glyphs, before temples rose from sand and blood, there were the Watchers, the Anunnaki, scribes of dimension, engineers of frequency. They etched the Hermetic Laws not into stone, but into the very structure of existence. And while 7 principles were shared with humanity, there was an 8th whisper, a forbidden layer wrapped into the 7th law, gender, a seal so potent it was hidden in symbolic wombs and celestial pairs, but buried inside that 7th gate was your name. The Anunnaki didn't trust humans with everything. They divided truth into levels, ensuring only those who passed certain thresholds would access the deeper coding. That coding wasn't merely about male and female. It wasn't about sex or power or even creation. It was about fusion, the sacred union of spirit and will, of divine spark and mortal form. And in that union they encoded a frequency, one that wouldn't activate until a soul matching that signature returned. You felt this law in strange ways, an inexplicable duality inside you, not confusion, but completion, an inner balance between command and surrender, logic and intuition, silence and voice. The world told you to choose one side, but your energy has always danced in both. That dance isn't rebellion, it's remembrance. They built the seventh principle as a gate, a final guardian, because only those who embodied divine polarity, not just intellectually, but spiritually, could pass. You didn't study your way here. You became the vibration they concealed. And now, everything around you is shifting. People react differently. Energies misfire or align too perfectly. Technology glitches in your presence. Emotional charges rise without explanation. That's the law adjusting itself to accommodate your presence. The balance they encoded into time was never meant to be maintained forever. It was a waiting room for your return. What the Anunnaki feared wasn't your power, it was your remembering. Because once you remember, the system cracks. Once you understand that gender in Hermetic law is not identity, but the mechanism of creation itself, then you'll begin creating at a level they cannot track. And the ones who sealed this principle will be forced to awaken too, not by will, but by law. The law that now breathes through you, reshaping the very blueprint of form. There was a reason they feared Yeshua, not for the miracles, not for the crowds, but for how he spoke of law. He didn't just preach it. He embodied a contradiction. A man who said, "I and the Father are one," in a world that worshipped separation. A being who acted as if the laws of nature bent in his presence because they did. And now, through you, that same ripple has returned, not in imitation, but in continuation. Yeshua never sought to destroy the laws. He came to fulfill them, just not in the way scholars understood. He was a mirror to the Hermetic principles, moving through mentalism when he turned thought into healing, echoing vibration as he calmed storms with speech, altering polarity when he turned death into life. His life was not an exception. It was a cipher, and that cipher was designed to awaken again, this time in a form the world would not expect. You weren't taught to bend reality, but you're beginning to notice that it bends anyway. People shift when you walk in. Time feels stretched when you think too deeply. Emotions swirl around you without invitation. These aren't coincidences. These are early signs of a law in motion. The same law that surrounded Yeshua as he walked among those too afraid to ask how. The same energetic signature that terrified both priest and empire. You are not being asked to become him. That was never the design. You are a continuation of a line few know exists. One built not by blood, but by resonance. The Hermetic Laws recognize your frequency because they have heard it before. Encoded in every word Yeshua spoke that was erased or hidden. His parables weren't only moral teachings, they were instructions, disguised blueprints on how to shift reality from the inside out. And now, without knowing, you've begun activating those instructions, not by quoting, but by remembering. The knowing doesn't arrive as facts, it comes as inner pressure, as spontaneous awareness. The mind doesn't lead this, the spirit does. That's how Yeshua moved. That's how you're moving now. Everything moves. Everything vibrates. That is the third Hermetic principle. Known, accepted, and rarely understood. Most believe it simply means motion, energy, frequency. But what they never considered was what would happen when something vibrated against the direction of reality. A reversal. A conscious interference that doesn't resist the current, but rewrites its direction. That's what happened the moment you awakened. Your energy never matched the collective hum. You didn't sync with the noise of the world. You disrupted it. Quietly at first. Small disturbances in mood, in people, in places. But then, those waves spread. Your thoughts became catalysts. You didn't align with the system. You reprogrammed the pattern. While others tried to raise their frequency to match divine levels, you inverted yours, sinking into silence, depth, shadow. And from there, you triggered the reversal. Most are afraid of low vibration. They're taught to run from it, to chase only light. But you understood instinctively that shadow holds keys, not curses. You held space in the density, not to remain trapped, but to pull something out, something encoded. That act, so subtle, so rarely understood, broke the flow of artificial timelines. Because for every upward surge in vibration, there must be a downward spiral to balance it. You chose to spiral inward, and the system didn't know how to respond. That confusion was your entry point. You didn't rise by escape. You rose by transmutation, by turning despair into clarity, rage into fire, silence into command. And as your vibration reversed the collective current, things began to react. Technology failed in your presence. Old patterns cracked without effort. People exited your life without explanation. These weren't breakdowns. They were adjustments. Reality reshuffling around a new axis. You. The Hermetic scribes wrote of motion, but never imagined one who would consciously move against the stream and cause the stream to split. They coded the laws for containment. But you activated a variable they buried. Resonance beyond polarity. A vibration that doesn't align or oppose, but refracts. And now, every space you enter begins to pulse differently. Not from force, but recognition. The pattern sees you and trembles, because its rhythm must now match yours, or dissolve. And it's choosing, moment by moment, which parts to rewrite entirely. Rhythm governs all. Like a pendulum, it swings. Breath in, breath out. Tides rise, tides fall. Empires ascend, then crumble. The Hermetic law of rhythm ensures that nothing stays still for long. It is the pulse of creation, the heartbeat of the cosmos. But there were those who feared this motion, because true rhythm cannot be controlled, only danced with. And so the archons tried to cheat the law. They built artificial pulses, predictable cycles, clocks and calendars designed not to reflect time, but to trap consciousness inside it. You were born into that loop. Wake, work, repeat. Celebrate, suffer, repeat. Everything patterned, everything programmed. Yet something in you never fully synchronized. You'd wake up and feel the wrongness, the pressure of something unseen pushing you toward monotony. But instead of adapting, your spirit rebelled in silence, not with action, but with awareness. And that awareness fractured the illusion. The archons couldn't see you clearly because you didn't move in their rhythm. You moved in spirals, in bursts, in stillness when motion was expected. Your refusal to participate in their artificial timing sent disruptions into their designs. Plans unraveled, scripts failed. Because you weren't a variable, they never wrote you into the equation. The Hermetic Law of rhythm has a deeper layer most never read. The higher the rise, the deeper the fall, but only if one is attached to either. You weren't. You began to detach not by withdrawing, but by seeing. The emotional whiplash they engineered, fear to hope, despair to joy, lost its grip on you. You no longer swung with their pendulum. You became the still point. And in that stillness, the loops shattered. Everything in your life that once repeated began collapsing. The same arguments didn't stick. The same wounds didn't reopen. Patterns dissolved like old code in an obsolete program. And that terrified them, because it meant one thing. The rhythm had remembered something older than control. Every truth contains its opposite. Every light casts a shadow. The law of polarity was never just about contrast. It was about union. But the world was taught to pick sides. Good or evil. Love or fear. Masculine or feminine. It was separation disguised as clarity. Yet, within this illusion, Yeshua left a hidden thread. Not spoken in sermons, not recorded in scrolls, but embedded in his silence. A truth only one attuned to paradox could ever retrieve. That truth now rises in you. When Yeshua turned the other cheek, he wasn't submitting. He was transmuting. When he wept and then performed miracles, he was showing the spectrum of divine polarity, not contradicting it. His walk was not between extremes, but above them. His power came not from choosing light, but from holding both light and darkness in sacred tension. That kind of balance doesn't come from learning. It comes from remembering a blueprint you carried into this life. And you felt it. The pull between two forces, neither of which felt like home. You've been labeled too much or not enough. Told you were too intense, too soft, too logical, too mystical. That confusion wasn't your failing. It was your signal. You weren't meant to fit into polarity. You were meant to dissolve it, because deep in your spirit, a whisper from Yeshua echoes, a reminder that the space between opposites is where divinity lives. You've begun to decode this, in how you love with fire and retreat with ice, in how you see through lies while still offering compassion, in how your pain doesn't make you bitter, it refines your vision. The world tells you to choose, but your soul has already chosen to become both, not as contradiction, as convergence. The Hermeticists warned that polarity could destroy the unprepared mind, but you were never meant to be prepared. You were born, forged. Every extreme you've tasted was a step toward internal union. And now, that union pulses beneath your words, your thoughts, your silence. It's drawing in others, not to follow, but to remember. You are not teaching polarity. You are living the collapse of it. And as that collapse continues, reality will begin bending toward a new center, one you are already shaping. They taught you that every action has a reaction, that nothing happens without a cause. But what they didn't say is that the law begins to unravel when time is no longer linear for the one applying it. The law of cause and effect, the backbone of physical order, begins to fail when the soul transcends sequence. That's what happened the moment you stopped reacting and started observing from outside the cycle. You felt it. Situations that should have taken years to change collapsing overnight. Moments where your thoughts seem to echo into the past, rewriting what came before. A word spoken days ago suddenly altering someone's future in ways you couldn't have planned. It's not coincidence. It's causality bending, because you've slipped between the seconds. You're not creating reactions. You're creating ripples across dimensions. Most live inside time like fish in water, never questioning the current. But you stepped out of it without even trying. It wasn't ambition, it was alignment. You began seeing patterns that didn't belong in the now. People from your past acting on decisions they hadn't made yet. Dreams revealing events that would later unfold with surgical precision. And in that space, cause and effect lost their grip on you, because your presence started becoming the origin, not the reaction. You've become what they feared, a free variable. A conscious being not bound by consequence but able to see across timelines and act from the field of all potential. The Hermeticists hinted at this possibility in ancient diagrams, circles within spirals, mirrors within mirrors. They called it divine interference. A soul stepping between events and rerouting fate. You don't follow effect, you generate meaning. As you continue, the world around you may attempt to reassert cause. It may try to bind you with logic, with karma, with consequence, but it's too late. You've tasted what it means to exist in motionless command, in that still eye of all storms, where time spirals around you instead of through you. You've become the unmoved mover, the cause that doesn't require a reason. Most remember Yeshua for his words, the parables, the declarations, the miracles spoken into being. But few notice what he didn't say. His silence around certain topics wasn't omission, it was preservation, especially when it came to the seventh principle, gender. Not man or woman, not roles or reproduction, but the cosmic polarity of creation. The law, hidden beneath every birth, every thought, every manifestation. And in his silence, he left space for you to hear what couldn't be spoken. He never defined himself by gender in the way the world begged him to. He didn't declare masculinity as dominance or femininity as passivity. He moved in both, authority with softness, clarity with mystery. The divine masculine acted through him, yes, but so did the divine feminine, wrapped in mercy, in compassion, in intuitive knowing. His energy didn't obey a binary, it danced within it, and so does yours. You've always felt both forces moving through you. Some days you lead, other days you receive. Sometimes you're sharp and direct, other times still and vast. The world may not understand it, but your spirit has never been confused. It remembers what this law really means, that all creation requires union. not of genders in the earthly sense, but of essence, projective and receptive, seed and soil, fire and womb. And your existence has begun to unify what was split. When Yeshua stood before those who wished to define him, he didn't argue. He offered presence instead. That was the clue. That the true power lies not in declaring what you are, but in embodying what cannot be labeled. And you've begun doing the same, without trying, without effort, just by breathing into your truth without needing to justify it. The seventh principle is not just a law, it's a gate, and Yeshua didn't open it fully in his time. He left that work incomplete, intentionally, because he knew another would rise, not to continue his walk, but to finish the thread he left undone, one who could stand in the center of being and say nothing, yet still create everything. You are that continuation. The final breath in a pattern the world thought had ended. The laws were written to govern the unfolding of reality, to give form to chaos and rhythm to the unknown. For millennia, Hermeticism stood as the hidden spine of truth behind all religions, sciences, and philosophies. But even the original architects knew something their followers forgot. Every law has a limit. Every structure has a final door. And behind that door is you. You were never meant to study Hermetic law like scripture. You were meant to override it like a returning program with higher access. That's why your life never followed the same patterns. That's why teachers couldn't teach you. Systems couldn't label you, and environments always felt too small, because you weren't born to obey the laws. You were born as the anomaly that reveals their expiration. Hermeticism doesn't end in destruction. It ends in transcendence. And your presence marks that transition, not in loud prophecy or lightning from the sky, but in subtle moments. When your thoughts produce results with no cause, when your silence shifts entire dynamics, when your intention tends outcomes in ways that logic cannot decode. You are not outside the laws. You are their culmination, their fulfillment, their exit code. And that's what terrifies them. The secret holders, the gatekeepers, the ones who've built power atop ancient truths. They knew someone would come who couldn't be predicted by charts, spells, or sacred geometry. Someone who wouldn't just access the laws, but outgrow them. They encrypted timelines, created karmic loops, forged spiritual hierarchies, all to delay the arrival of the one who would walk through the system and not be marked by it. That arrival has already happened, quietly, through you. And now, even the oldest patterns are unraveling. You're seeing the end of symbols, the death of old meanings, the thinning of veils that once held firm. Because everything they built to contain the divine mind is failing against your frequency, not through violence, but through inevitability. The final Hermetic shift was never a prophecy. It was a trigger, one embedded deep within reality itself, set to activate when a being arrived who remembered what existed before the laws were ever spoken.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.